I got to fly the 182 and Turbo 206 with Cessna for a few days, and they are both incredible airplanes, but they have some big differences. So we'll look at the key features side by side so you can make the decision of what's right for you. And I didn't expect this, but after flying both of them, my mind was changed. I'll tell you why. The 182 and Turbo 206 are pretty similar in their layout, although the 206 has that third row bench seat fit into it as well. The 206 is the 182's big brother in some ways, and so as such, you'd think that it would also have a bigger hangar footprint, but surprisingly, the 206 is actually 9 inches shorter than the 182, even though it's got that third row. Kind of interesting. And the new ones have the same height, the same wingspan, and the same area. So if you can fit a 182 in your hangar, you can also fit a 206 in your hangar. But a big area that they are quite different is in their useful load. How much can they carry? The 182 has a little over 1,100 pounds of useful load. The Turbo 206 is a little over 1,400. And once you load both of these up with full fuel, which is 87 gallons in each of them, the 182 can carry just under 600 pounds. The Turbo 206 is a little over 900 pounds. But that's worth a bit of a disclaimer though. Like, I own a 182 and I can tell you, you really don't need to be flying around with full fuel all the time unless you just have a reason to do it. So if you fly around with like 2/3 fuel or something, which is still over 3.5 hours of fuel, depending on how you fly, that useful load will get you another 175 pounds back or so, putting that useful load up to like 760-ish. The point is, the 182 still carries a decent amount. But the Turbo 206 with 900 plus pounds of useful load on top of full fuel is really just incredible because it's very realistically full fuel, 4 people, all their stuff, and you can still go. And that is one of the best parts of that airplane. In terms of speed, the 182 has a published max cruise speed of 145 knots. The Turbo 206 is a max speed of 161 knots. One caveat of the Turbo though is you're probably gonna have to go pretty high up to achieve that max cruise speed. And we did one time when we were going to Arkansas. We were up at 17,000 feet, which was really cool to be up in a piston that high. It was so smooth, and I thought I could see the curvature of the earth. You can't, but the GoPros kind of made it look like it, which is funny. But we were getting that 161 knots, and then another time when we were flying in Colorado, we were at 14,500 and we were getting about 158 knots. So a little bit slower. And then if you're lower than that, it's also going to be a little bit slower than that. But I think anytime you're looking at speed and comparing one airplane versus the other, you just need to think about it in like practical terms. Because if you look at like a 200 nautical mile trip or something, which is a pretty normal trip for me flying around Texas in my 182, if you compare going 140 or 145 knots to 161 knots, if you can get high up and achieve that, the difference is like 8 minutes. It's something you're never going to notice really. So my stance on this is unless you're routinely needing to go far and fast, it's just not going to add up to that big of a difference. Moving over to the engine, the 182 has a Lycoming IO 540 engine, which puts out 230 horsepower. The Turbo 206 is a Lycoming TIO 540 engine, and it puts out 310 horsepower. Now the 182 at cruise, they'll say has an advertised like 15 gallons per hour of burn, but in reality, you can probably get less than that. Like, I know it's little apples and oranges, but my 182 from 1975, it's got the 230 horsepower Continental engine. I flight plan for like 13 gallons an hour. And honestly, you can pull it back farther than that. So if you flight plan for 15 in the new ones, like it's going to be conservative, but you can get a little less than that. And the Turbo 206, on the other hand, burns more like 20 to 20 and a half gallons per hour. It's going to burn more because of that turbo. So now with that data, this is where we can start to look at range. Now, by the book, the 182 has a maximum range of 915 nautical miles. The Turbo 206 is 703 nautical miles. Now, I have never, ever operated an airplane in max range configuration and really pulling it back and trying to stretch the legs, because the reality is my legs need to be stretched and my bladder has a shorter range than my airplane. So I think a more practical way to look at this is just look at an average flight. Like, how fast are we going? How much fuel are we burning? How long are we gonna go? And how far does that actually get us? So if we fill in some assumptions for how far you travel in like 3 hours, you'll find that the average leg distance for each plane is really fairly similar. So while the 182 technically has a couple hundred more nautical miles of range, on an average like 3-hour cruise flight, they're probably gonna be fairly similar. Now I will say one nice thing about having the additional range of the 182, like in my 182, I can comfortably carry 5 or 6 hours of fuel. I have never flown that airplane for 5 or 6 hours at a time. I just can't do it. But the nice thing is that you can, and so you don't have to stop for fuel as much, or you can do multiple flights on one tank of gas, or if you're going to the backcountry or something, like you've got enough gas to be able to hop around to a bunch of different airports and stuff. And that is nice, but it doesn't actually mean I'm gonna go fly 900 miles at a time. I've never done that. So again, with all these numbers, just kind of look at it on a practical level. As for climb rate, they both have impressive maximum climb rates here, but the normally aspirated 182 is not going to keep that climb rate as you go up because, as with all non-turbocharged airplanes, you lose engine performance as you climb. But the Turbo 206 is in a completely different category here. When we flew in Colorado and took off out of Colorado Springs to go to Aspen, we had full fuel, 3 people, and lots of camera gear. We were climbing through 8,500 feet and we're still comfortably getting 850 foot per minute climb rate, going about 100 knots. And we could have been climbing steeper than that as well because the VY is 87 knots. So we were climbing really well. And later on, we were at 13,500 feet, going about 95 knots and still climbing 850 feet per minute. I know that's a lot of numbers, but if you just kind of wipe it all away for a second, the point is that sustained climb rate is going to be much higher in the Turbo 206, and it's one of the main advantages and reasons you would get a turbocharged engine. And Cessna also makes a Turbo 182, and that's worth looking at if that really is a good fit for your mission. I just want to cover the 2 airplanes that I actually flew with them. And this takes us up to the cruising altitude. Now, like most normally aspirated pistons, you're probably going to be flying the 182 no higher than like 10 or 12,000 feet, unless you're carrying oxygen, but even above that, the engine's gonna lose performance, and you're just not commonly up there. But by the book, it does have a max ceiling of 18,100 feet. You're never really gonna be up there. But on the other hand, the Turbo 206 has a max service ceiling of 26,000 feet, and I actually could see you getting up there. Now, when we flew it, we only ever got up to 17,000 feet because we only had nose cannulas on board for the oxygen. And to go much higher, you actually need an oxygen mask. But flying around in the Rocky Mountains and stuff, like I could absolutely see the use case to jump up into the high teens at least and go over stuff, whether that's terrain or weather or go and find, more favorable winds or whatever. But having that extra optionality with the turbo can come in real handy depending on where you're flying. And the 206 has oxygen already integrated into the aircraft, and so it makes it really easy to just strap it on and keep climbing. Now, in terms of takeoff and landing distances, by the book, they're pretty similar, though in real life, you're probably going to get better performance than this because remember, these numbers come from certification testing, which are intentionally conservative. But on a practical level, though, like you're going to see 182s and 206s in Class B airspace. You're also going to see them in the backcountry. Like I've flown my 182 to interesting parts of Texas, to Arkansas, to Idaho, all these different places, and it's a great backcountry airplane. It really is. And the 206 is no different. So the takeoff and landing performance is great. Okay, so what are these airplanes actually like to fly? Well, honestly, they all fly like a 172. If you can fly 172, and everyone can, they're so responsive and easy to fly and forgiving and stuff. Moving up into a 182 is just a bigger, faster, stronger version of that. And then it's a similar leap up into the 206, but all very, very approachable. And I can prove it with the numbers here, because if we look at the maximum takeoff weights in a new 172 versus a 182 and 206, it's kind of a similar step up in weight, so to speak, from the 172 to a 182. And then a similar step up from the 182 to the Turbo 206. You're going up by about 20% or so in weight on each. And then similarly, if we just look at like the power increases, you're gonna get about 30% more power or so out of a 182. And then you're gonna get about 35% more power for the 206. So it's kind of a linear progression, honestly. But they're all responsive, super easy to fly. Like there's a reason they've been making these for decades and decades. Like they're great flying airplanes. And if you can fly one, you can move up the line pretty easily. Now, once we get inside, the cabin dimensions are pretty similar as well. The Turbo 206 is 1 inch taller and 1 inch wider inside than the 182. But the biggest thing you'll notice is that there are 4 seats in the 182 and you got 6 in the Turbo 206. And along with that, you get these huge double doors in the back of the Turbo 206. You don't have those on the 182. And this is how you access the third row and the cargo area is through these doors. Now, the aft bench seat is not as roomy as the other 4 seats in front of it, but in my opinion, kids and small adults would be just fine back there. But it's great because you can also lay that bench seat flat if you want for extra baggage room, Or better yet, you can easily take the entire bench seat out, which creates a massive area for cargo. And this combined with a large useful load is one of the best features of the 206. Now, in exchange for getting those huge double doors in the back, you do lose the co-pilot side door. And so all front 4 seats are accessed through the pilot side door. But to me, I think it's a very, very worthwhile trade-off. Both of these aircraft new are equipped with the same avionics in the G1000 NXI, and the electronic standby is the Garmin GI-275. There's no vacuum system anymore in the new versions of these aircraft. You also get the Garmin GFC 700 autopilot, which is just awesome. If you've ever flown Garmin stuff before, it's tremendous. You also get the Flightstream 510 as well, which allows you to sync your iPad or your phone if you want to the panel, which makes flight planning and uploading so much easier just to send it directly from your iPad. And then these aircraft are also equipped with electronic stability protection, or ESP, which is one of my favorite features in the entire aircraft, because this can automatically engage the autopilot at straight and level flight if it senses that you might be disoriented or overbanked for a prolonged period of time. So these new ones are incredibly sophisticated. Now, in terms of price, it's totally going to depend on what you buy, how it's equipped, and more. But if we go over to the computer here, I spent some time researching current listings. I built this little table of comps and I tried to group it together by decade. That's not a super scientific way to do it, but just to kind of give you a sense. And I grouped turbo and non-turbo 206s together since most of them were turbocharged anyways. And it's a small data set, so I wanted to have more data. So in general, 206s from the 1900s, just a funny thing to say, feel old. They're going to be high 5 figures more, at least based on this data. Anything from the 2000s onward is, 100,000 to 200,000 different or so. And as a percent, that equates to about 30% more, but that's not a rule, just an observation. And this is what I was able to see as the time of this filming. Brand new ones are going to be higher than this also, depending on how you built them and what they're equipped with and stuff, but this will give you a general sense. And just a quick note on legacy aircraft. I have owned my 1975 182 for 10 years, and I absolutely love it. I think it's an affordable option, at least in the scheme of aviation. I know it's all expensive, but I think it's on the affordable end of what it could be, even though it doesn't have all the latest and greatest features, especially on avionics, but I'm considering a panel upgrade in that too to kind of bring it up to today's age. But the point is, you don't have to buy a new aircraft to still experience the awesomeness of the 182 or the 206. I mean, if you can afford one and that's what you want to do, I'd say go for it. The new ones are, they're awesome, absolutely. But if that's out of reach, and it is for me, the legacy ones are awesome, and I can say that firsthand. Now, we know that the purchase price is not the whole picture here, right? You gotta own it and operate it and stuff. So in terms of operating costs, this will kind of depend on your own situation in terms of your hangar, your insurance, if you're financing it, etc. But if we just look at it on a pure variable cost level, Cessna actually worked up some estimates for me on the new 182, the new Turbo 206, that factors in your average speed, which includes some ground time, climbs, descents, and cruise, etc. to come up with an average. Comes up with fuel flow for all that averaged out, maintenance labor, fuel parts, and overhaul reserves for engine and propeller. So if you put all that into the blender, it came out to about $194 per hour for the 182 and $275 for the Turbo 206 for 200 flight hours per year. For 100 flight hours per year, it goes up by about $20 per hour or so on each. Now, the overhaul reserves aren't really cash expenses every time you fly, but they're good to keep in mind. But just for the sake of argument, if you want to remove those for a minute, just to look at the actual cash outlay, like here and now every time you go out and fly, it's about $150 an hour for the 182 and $197 an hour for the Turbo 206. And for 100 flight hours per year, it again goes up by roughly $20 per hour or so on each. I know there are a lot of moving pieces here when it comes to budgeting for an airplane, and so if you want to play around with your own numbers, I have a free budgeting spreadsheet that you can use. It's totally free. It helps you kind of map out your fixed costs, your variable costs based on how often you're going to fly and stuff, and then it gives you an answer on how much per flight hour that's going to cost you, how much per month, how much per year, that sort of thing. It's totally free. You can grab it over at airplaneacademy.com/budget, or you can just scan the QR code on the screen here if you're watching on your television, or the link is also down in the description, and I hope that it can help you. Okay, so here is my changed perspective on the 182 versus the 206, now that I've spent enough time in both of them. I still love my 182. I've owned it for 10 years. I still firmly believe it is one of the best GA airplanes ever made because it is really good at a little bit of everything. And I used to think that the 206 was totally overkill unless you were always needing to haul a ton and do rugged backcountry stuff. I think of it like my mental picture for the 206 is this airplane parked at Sulphur Creek in Idaho, and they brought in all the groceries once a week in this airplane. Incredible airplane. It just was not my mission. Or so I thought. But what surprised me after flying the 206 in different states for several days, it wasn't just the useful load. Like, that is as good as advertised. I thought, well, I can just carry a lot. That's cool. That is cool, but it's not what changed my mind. What got me was the performance margin. Like the climb, the high altitude capability, that feeling that the airplane just had more in the tank. It just had extra in reserve. I didn't fully appreciate how good that would feel and how I would desire that even if I was flying solo. Because I always told myself I'd only want a 206 one day if I had a huge family and I was routinely needing to load it up. Like, it was all about the useful load because that is the big headline of the airplane. But I was surprised when I came home and I told my wife about the trip and I said, yeah, I want one. Because even if you only need that useful load like 10% of the time, it's all of that extra performance you get the rest of the 90% of the time that makes it so compelling. And so I think if it is in your budget, I firmly say do it. Get the 206 because I genuinely think it's worth it. But if that's overkill, if it feels like overkill, then like I said, the 182 is one of the best decisions you'll ever make. That's why I've owned mine for a decade and I still love it. And that old image that I had of the 206 as just a backcountry hauler, it's still there, but now it's only part of the story. Because after flying it into Aspen, I see the Turbo 206 as a true luxury utility aircraft. It's something that can carry a lot, go just about anywhere, and do it all with real margin. And that flight into Aspen is one of the coolest in my logbook, and I was so grateful that we got to film the whole thing. So that video is in the screen right now. It'll give you a real sense of what the Turbo 206 is like to fly in real life, so I'll see you there.